Hello and welcome to News Centre. I'm Parikshit Luthra. US President Donald Trump has claimed that Prime Minister Modi has assured him that India will stop buying Russian oil. Speaking to reporters at the Oval Office, Trump said India will halt purchases within a short period of time. In response, the Indian Ministry of External Affairs said safeguarding consumer interests will be top priority. The ministry neither confirmed nor denied if this conversation on Russian oil took place between Prime Minister Modi and President Trump. The MEA went on to say that there has been steady progress on the expansion of the relationship with the US and discussions are ongoing about a trade deal. India's chief negotiator Rajesh Agrawal is in the US for a fresh round of talks. Here is President Trump speaking on India's oil trade with Russia.
This is a war that should have never started, but it's a war that Russia should have won in the first week, and they're going into the fourth year. And I want to see it stop. So I was not happy that India was buying oil. And he assured me today that they will not be buying oil from Russia. That's a big stop. And he's assured me there will be no oil purchased from Russia. I don't know, maybe that's a breaking story. Can I say that? Would you say? There will be no oil. He's not buying his oil from Russia. It started. You know, you can't do it immediately. It's a little bit of a process. But the process is going to be over with soon.
To take this discussion forward, I'm now joined by Pramit Chaudhuri, South Asia Practice Head at the Eurasia Group, and Sumit, Ritolia, Lead Research Analyst at Kpler. Thank you very much, gentlemen, for joining us. Sumit, if I could first try and understand from you, we currently hear from our sources in the industry that India's oil and gas purchases from the US have already touched $8 billion US. They're likely to reach about $13 billion by the end of this year. Could you give us a sense of what you have gathered from various sources about India's oil imports from the United States currently, and how does this compare to India's imports from Russia right now?
Okay, hi Parikshit, thanks you. So yeah, there is a notable increase in India's purchase from the United States, particularly in the Q3. I mean, July to September, as when we speak, or October is lining up to one of the highest imports in terms of crude oil and gas since 2022. So Indian refiners have increased their purchases from United States. But compared to Russia, like I would again take a break and say, like, India is very unlikely to rapidly decrease or go down on the path of not buying any Russian barrels. So to be honest, whatever if it has to happen will be based on pricing, or if unless like there is a sanctions tomorrow, like what we have on Iran and Venezuela. So and at the time of speaking, like October loading from Russia to India is around at fourth month high, around 1600 KBD, and in October imports to India is highest since June. So data speaks that Russian barrels is here to stay. And compared to US barrels is corresponding around 5 to 10% of India's total import, whereas Russian barrels is sitting at the highest top of the ladder with around 35 to 40% of total import.
Right. Let me also now go across to Pramit. Pramit, how do you see Donald Trump's statement, a very strong statement where he said that he has spoken to Prime Minister Modi. Prime Minister Modi has assured him that he will be stopping Russian oil purchases altogether. Do you think we're now close to arriving at some sort of trade agreement?
So keep in mind that U.S. Treasury Secretary Scott Bessent had already publicly said a few weeks ago that they were expecting India to phase out Russian oil, but over a period of time. And we've been hearing that the Americans have basically urged India that as you phase it out, buy U.S. oil. India had said, can we also buy Iranian and Venezuelan? We've seen reports of that to replace some of the Russian oil. We haven't got that agreement. The good thing about saying that we will buy American oil as a part of a partial phase out is that there is very little American crude available. Most American crude has been bought or booked well in advance, largely by governments and companies trying to keep the American system happy. So the phase out, if there is going to be one, will be over a period of time. But all of this points together at at least an agreement coming to on the 25% punitive tariff that was imposed over Russian oil purchases. India has always said, and you saw Vladimir Putin acknowledge this in a public statement, that this is an economic decision. In other words, it's not about a strategic policy. It is just that if Russian oil is cheaper or makes more economic sense, we will continue to buy it. If it doesn't make economic sense, we are prepared to go somewhere else. Today, that Ritolia would know better than I would, but my understanding that gap, the benefits of buying Russian oil are now actually being reduced to possibly as little as $2 a barrel, simply because global oil prices have fallen and are now very, very close to the $50 G7 price cap on Russian oil that we are following right now. So for India, the economic benefit is not particularly great. Our Russia relationship is extremely strong, so it's not driven by oil. And if it's part of a larger trade deal, then it would make perfect sense in the national interest for India to do so.
Right. And what is your sense, Pramit? What could India do in terms of long-term energy purchases from the US to meet the trade deficit? Certain sources in the government believe that, yes, there is a $45 billion trade deficit, but the energy trade itself may be good enough to address this trade deficit.
So you may remember after the February summit between Modi and Trump, the Indian Foreign Secretary Vikram Misri in the press conference afterwards had said India could see, if I remember correctly, buying $20 billion worth mainly of LNG from the United States. Oil not in great supply, other products that are coal and so on don't make much sense to get from the United States. But LNG is something America does produce in large quantities. Even there, they're kind of tapped out for the time being. But by early 2030, we should start to see a large increase in American LNG production, something that we do need. In the negotiations, the private negotiations between India and the US, America has also said that India investing in LNG programs in the United States would also be considered acceptable and would be considered an offset against that trade deficit. That would actually make the most sense. These long-term LNG terminals, gas fields are generally quite profitable. We found that definitely with the Russians when we invested in Sakhalin, which seems to be coming out of sanctions in Siberia, that these are extremely profitable for India. So if that is also going to be part of the mix, then it makes perfect sense for India to consider both buying LNG in the long run, but also even better, perhaps investing in American LNG terminals and gas fields.
Right. Sumit, if I can return to you, what would be your sense in terms of the total value of India's oil purchases from the United States by the end of this year? We've got informal estimates of about 12 to 13 billion US dollars. What would be your estimate for this fiscal or for this calendar year since Trump has come to power and till the end of this fiscal year?
So our internal assumption is around your number only, but coming back to again, like there is not much potential upsides to India buying crude oil from United States. So we have already hit 300 KBD till now, and I see further upside of around 150 KBD only. Whatever the minister was saying, that whatever India can increase buying is another on LNG and LPG, but on crude oil side, we are almost capped.
So you're saying that now there is greater room for buying LNG and LPG from the US. That's what you're saying.
Yeah, rather than increased crude oil imports. Like crude oil, we can go max to max 100 to 150 KBD more, but not more than that.
All right. Maximum 100 to 150 KBD more. That's what Sumit is saying. Pramit, also, what do you think are the remaining sticking points in the deal? Is it the average tariff rate? Is it because they want greater access to agriculture and dairy, or they want zero tariffs for US automobiles also?
Knowing the way the Trump administration has negotiated both with us and with other countries, My understanding is on the agriculture, there is broad agreement that products from like soya products, which and corn products could be imported into India. India needs a lot of that. We are short, for example, of high quality livestock feed. And both corn and soya livestock feed is something we need. We are already one of the world's largest importers of soybean oil, so being able to buy some from America, which should be reasonably easy. But we basically put in, at best, a phase-in for actual grain, in other words, soybean grain and corn itself. And that more or less will get us past the agricultural gate. But I think more importantly is that there are now issues of so-called national treatment. Trump has often said that India cannot have a discriminatory policy, regulatory policy towards US versus Indian firms in the digital and financial space. So for example, India imposes a slightly higher tax on foreign banks than it does on Indian banks. It has data localization, cross-border data restrictions on foreign companies. It has similar restrictions, for example, in e-commerce and so on. I think at a time when India is trying very hard to attract FDI, our net FDI numbers have collapsed in the past year or so, this actually makes sense. So I think on that, we shouldn't see too many differences as well. The question is time. Do we have time to complete all of these technical details before the end of the year, given that India has a holiday, America has two big holidays coming up, to Thanksgiving week and Christmas, of course, and the US government is shut down, which makes it extremely difficult to negotiate with them. That is, I think, the more, maybe a bigger constraint than anything else.
Okay, now in terms of diversifying, if we were to slow down buying of Russian oil and gas, Sumit, where else would we go apart from the United States?
Okay, so that's a good question, and I think Indian refiners are already on the diversification spree. We have increased intake from LATAM. You have increased volume coming from Nigeria this month, and even the public sectors have increased their cooperation with Middle Eastern suppliers. So in terms of if India sees the day that we need to diversify, but I don't see more than 200, 300 KBD unless there is some complete guidance from the New Delhi. So US, LATAM, particularly Brazil, and in Africa, you have Nigeria, and one of the major sources for our energy, Middle East, is also there.
All right. Pramit, we've just heard from the MEA spokesperson. He was asked if there has been any kind of conversation since yesterday between Prime Minister Modi and President Trump, because President Trump claimed that Prime Minister has told him today that India is going to stop buying Russian oil. The MEA spokesperson has said that, as far as I know, there has been no telephone calls between Prime Minister Modi and President Trump yesterday. What does this indicate to you? There are also indications coming in that Prime Minister Modi will go for the ASEAN summit in Malaysia later this month, and there could be a possible meeting between the two leaders. How do you see Trump's statement and the Indian government's denial of that phone call?
So Trump, as you know, his statements, the reality of what was said between him and other world leaders and what he says at the press conferences, there's often a bit of a gap. And he has a tendency not only to confuse what was said, he even confuses the countries that are involved and will often confuse world leaders. And definitely the time when exactly he heard what and from where can also often have to be corrected later on by the US government. I think, well, for all our practical purposes, I think what we're really looking at is under a commitment from India to consider phasing out Russian oil. And that, I think, Besant's statement is a really better indicator of that, in return for a reduction in the removal of the punitive tariffs, and presumably as part of a larger FTA negotiation agreement over a period of time. That would make perfect sense.
Right.
Whether they had a phone conversation yesterday, I doubt that. Trump and Modi have had reasonably restricted phone calls, and normally something at this kind of a conversation, this is not something that will be discussed in that level. But Trump, I think, can probably confuse this with either earlier statement between the two, or possibly
All right.
even one of the other intermediaries. For example, we had the US ambassador designate Sergio
Okay.
Gore was in India for a week, and it's perfectly possible that Gore briefed Trump, and Trump has then extrapolated that to being a conversation between him and Modi, and that is also on par with the way Trump has acted in the past.
All right. Thank you very much, Pramit Chaudhuri and Sumit Ritolia, for joining us here for a very interesting discussion. We have to take a break, but before we go,